yesterday, the news continued to swirl around the question of whether Joe Biden would indeed stay in the presidential race. Now, this is something that I had thought was a settled matter, but we are seeing voices of rebellion come from within the party and also from Hollywood, with George Clooney, of all people, asking the president to step aside. Now, I bring this up not to get you upset or to myself open the door here. I am absolutely resolute. I am fully supporting Biden-Harris unless there is, for some reason, another set of people on the Democratic ticket. Okay? That is the plan. I will do anything within my legal power to make sure Donald Trump does not get a hold of the levers of power again. But I want to address this because one of the most savvy politicians in our lifetime, Nancy Pelosi, spoke yesterday on Morning Joe. And she has been sort of criticized for allegedly kind of not fully stepping up and supporting Joe Biden. But I listened to the full interview, and that is not at all what I heard. And so I thought I would share with you some clips, and we could analyze them together. Let's look first at the question that Mika Brzezinski posed to Nancy Pelosi.
How do you think the president is doing in light of his poor debate performance? Can he do more? And what do you say to Democrats in Congress and even members of the Senate who are beginning to waver in their support?
Good morning, Mika. That's one version of the story. What I do want to say is that yesterday I was honored to be present at the president's speech at NATO.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, because she went on and on for another minute and a half, praising Joe Biden as a leader, setting out his accomplishments, in particular, what he is doing this week at the NATO conference. And then, from there, because she had dodged the question, Jonathan Lemire posed it again.
Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with. I think it's really important, and I would hope everyone would join in, to let him deal with this NATO conference. This is a very big deal.
Now that you have the full context, I hope that you can appreciate and engage with me in a different interpretation. It's not that Nancy fell short of supporting Joe. Quite the opposite. What I heard there was a sage leader with knowledge that we don't fully have, that perhaps Biden is still trying to consider his options, and perhaps there really is a groundswell of concern and a plan in place, perhaps for him, if he chooses to hand the torch over to Kamala Harris. We just don't know. But what Nancy was trying to get at here was he is at the NATO summit. He is the host. He is orchestrating this event. And more importantly, if he decided that this was an amazing legacy, wouldn't it be lovely to have your last official act as one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful people in the world, and highly praised and highly influential, to have your last act be something so magnificent, and not to have people nipping at your heels while you are doing this? And my second story is exciting news from yesterday morning when AOC, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, introduced articles of impeachment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce articles of impeachment against Associate Justices of the Supreme Court Clarence Thomas and Samuel Anthony Alito, Jr. Corruption without consequence infects all it touches. And that is why this body, Congress, has a constitutional and moral obligation to hold these justices accountable, to maintain the integrity of our courts, and to uphold the standards of the judiciary and our institutions.
And in a very general sense, these dealt with the justices' failure to disclose lavish gifts furnished upon them and their families by wealthy benefactors, as well as their refusal to recuse from cases in which they either had a personal or financial interest or a family member did. Now, the first thing that might come to mind for you is, will this go nowhere? And the answer to that is no. Here's why. And I think the best person to explain the procedural reason for this is the lawyer who helped AOC's office in drafting these impeachment articles. We interviewed him today live on Legal Nerds, and I will show you a clip right now of where he explains this procedural move.
The Congresswoman may decide to introduce this as a privilege resolution. If she does that, then it requires a vote within 48 hours of business time on the floor of the House. If she doesn't do it that way, then it will be a matter that needs to first come before the House Judiciary Committee. We know the House Judiciary Committee is controlled, as is the entire House, by the Republican Party, and they would probably slow walk it or wouldn't even potentially allow for a hearing. But what's critical here is that this debate must begin. It must begin now. This level of corruption is unprecedented at the Supreme Court. And she's right, with colleagues like Congresswoman Omar and others who have sponsored this, to now move that debate forward.
So I read through these documents, they're not too long, and was able to see what AOC is focused on. Now, when it comes to Thomas, there are 3 articles, meaning 3 separate grounds to argue that he committed high crimes and misdemeanors. The first was that he failed to disclose the assorted gifts that he got from Harlan Crow. And this is when I want to take a moment to make a correction from my story from yesterday's Morning Gem. I mistakenly said that it was Harlan Crow who loaned Thomas the $267,000 to buy that luxury RV. But it was not. It was someone named Anthony Welters. But you can't fault me. There were so many people throwing money at Clarence Thomas, a girl can get confused. Okay, so in addition to that, Thomas had 2 other grounds for impeachment, and they both related to his failure to recuse from cases before the Supreme Court that had some impact on his wife, Ginny Thomas. Now, some of these cases related to her financial interests. In other words, through some shadowy enterprises and people like Leonard Leo, Ginny Thomas was earning money from organizations that filed briefs before the United States Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas did not ever recuse himself from those cases. Okay, in addition to that, as we know, he failed to recuse himself from cases involving the insurrection and the whole Stop the Steal movement that Ginny Thomas herself was part of. Now, with Alito, the 2 articles of impeachment were kind of in reverse order. The first one was his failure to recuse from 2 different cases related to Donald Trump's immunity in connection with the January 6th election interference, as well as the insurrectionists in a different case called Fisher versus United States. And even though he was asked to recuse, he refused. And remember, this relates to his having flags flown at two of his homes that were adopted by or associated with people who supported the insurrection. And the second article of impeachment for Alito relates to his failure to disclose luxury vacations provided to him by his benefactor, Paul Singer, who had interests before the Supreme Court. And my third item before we move to Crazy Town is fabulous news out of the U.S. Senate, where Jeff Merkley and other senators from both parties joined together to introduce legislation to ban individual stock trading by members of Congress.
We must be here to serve the public, not our portfolios. And Americans are well aware that time after time, the portfolios of members of Congress do better than the S&P 500. There's even investment funds that mimic the investments of members of Congress because of this phenomenon. So people are aware that senators and House members are benefiting from privileged information they may get a little earlier than the rest of the world, and they do not like this.
At last, we are in Crazy Town. Lauren Boebert, she is an entire crazy town, crazy county, crazy universe to herself. What transpired yesterday was her feeble attempt to grill the head of the EPA and claim that it was his job in light of a recent Supreme Court decision, the Loper decision, which we've talked about. This is the one that ended Chevron deference, right? You'll hear more about this in this clip in a moment, in case you forgot. So she was grilling the head of the EPA, and she was getting the law entirely wrong. And he was trying to be respectful. And then finally, Congressman Dan Goldman stepped in and set the record straight. Let's listen.
I'm asking about the EPA, and I'm asking about your rogue bureaucrats that have enacted these unconstitutional regulations. Are you going to repeal them? Are you going to continue to implement them? Or are you going to stop altogether since it's been overturned?
Do you understand the ruling?
Do you understand the ruling of the Supreme Court?
I do. And so your question is ill-formed. No.
Will you be repealing?
We're not going to stop.
You're going to unconstitutionally continue with these rulemakings.
We're going to adhere to the Supreme Court and continue to do
which rulemakings are you going to roll back?
We're going to adhere to the Supreme Court and continue to do our work in accordance to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court.
So which ones are you going to repeal?
The Supreme Court didn't tell us to repeal anything.
They have been deemed unconstitutional.
No.
Absolutely, they have. This was a huge victory.
Mr. Regan, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I would just like to clarify a few things for my colleague from Colorado. The Loper-Bright ruling, as you know, said that the courts should not defer to agency rulemaking if a statute is ambiguous, and instead the courts get to determine whether or not what the statute means. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that would not require any regulations to be reversed or overturned, correct?
Correct.
Thank you for spending a bit of your morning with me. Please remember to tune in at noon today for Nerd Avengers. And if you are new to this space and you are not yet subscribing to the Mary Trump Media channel, please do it now. You don't want to miss any of our programming. We are adding new shows every week.